the dollar end game? Like socially, do you view it as something as a Mad Max type scenario that plays out, a Mandibles type scenario, or is going over the event horizon a catalyst to actually affect meaningful change in terms of people throwing up their hands, pointing at all the politicians and central planners and saying, you got us in this situation, and having something not like Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street, but a moment where people realize things are so messed up beyond the pale that they need to depend on individuals and institutions outside the governments and central banks to fix this problem.
Yeah, well, wasn't it either F.A. Hayek or Milton Friedman who said in the 70s, right? We will never get rid of the government control of money unless we introduce in a roundabout way an asset that they can't stop.
Yeah, Friedrich Hayek.
Yeah, that's Hayek. And so I think Bitcoin presents that solution, right? I think about all of what's happening with the political cycle and the economic cycle in the context of the Fourth Turning, which is a great book by Neil Howe and Strauss. And in that book, right, they describe how history is cyclical. It's not linear. That the main way we think about history, which is in history books, of things progressing quickly to another and then the next thing and the next thing, and it's like a logical linear progression of time, is actually incorrect. It's much more cyclical because the generational problems keep reappearing. The generation that deals with them solves a problem, or at least mostly solves it, and then causes a boom period. And then that boom, it starts to erode into basically like a topping process and a spiritual awakening, and then a decline, and then a crisis, and then another boom. And so this cycle of death and rebirth is kind of foreseen in every single society, right? It's observed in every single advanced society since, the Greeks and the Romans. I mean, even in the Bible, right? In the Old Testament, they talk about the debt jubilees, which would happen every 52 years, which is approximately the lifespan of somebody living back then. So every long life, they'd have a debt jubilee and a reset of their financial system. And I think, given the 80-year period from 1940, 2020 is right at that 80-year mark. And so we are right now in a fourth turning. And I think that this problem with our money, the problem with central banks and 0% interest rates and this financial gravity we've trapped ourselves in is finally coming home to roost. And I think that the general public is slowly waking up. Just look at the conversations that people are having. Look at the amount of interest that's brewing up in Bitcoin and in other solutions and in the problems with inflation, right? Stuff like that wouldn't have happened 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And now thousands and thousands of people every day are getting interested in Bitcoin. Millions of people on Twitter are talking about the Fed and rate policy and QE, where 10, 15 years ago, I mean, it was not popular or interesting to talk about this stuff just because it wasn't front of mind. There wasn't a crisis, really. And so as we progress through this fourth turning, I think, unfortunately, most people, they don't wake up until this really starts to affect their day-to-day life. And the first awakening, you could say, happened with COVID and the lies perpetrated by the government and the health authorities, and then the subsequent inflation and the gaslighting and lies from the Fed that it was transitory, that it wouldn't, affect the real economy, that we'd retrace and get back to normal price levels after the pandemic, which of course has never happened. And people's own anecdotal experience seeing inflation rise much more quickly and much more aggressively than even their statistics mention also caused this lack of faith. So I think people are waking up, and unfortunately, most people don't wake up until it's very late in the game. I'm not thinking that we would have a Mad Max style, just zombie movie, shotgun your neighbor kind of apocalypse, right? Even if you study other hyperinflations, there is severe strain on the economy. There's severe strain on people and on, their mental and psychological well-being, for sure. But people find a way to survive. People find solutions. People look for new, new opportunities, new ways to cope with it. And that means, right, they could mean in Zimbabwe in 2008, they started using, during their hyperinflation, they used fuel coupons as money instead of the Zimbabwe dollar. So they got these fuel coupons from the government. They would use them for, each one was valuable for, or valid for 1 liter of fuel. And they would just trade that as a form of money in between themselves to facilitate trade and to, settle transactions. So who's to say that that couldn't happen with Bitcoin? And so I think ultimately that would accelerate Bitcoin adoption. But unfortunately, again, most people, 80%, are not going to get the memo until it's really late and we see Bitcoin at 500K and inflation's at 30% and the Fed is doing yield curve control and they're like, holy shit, I need to get some of this. Yeah, well, you probably should have gotten some like 5 years ago. But that's why we're here early and that's why we're right, ultimately.
Yeah. And it's not only the fact that people are having these conversations. I think it's like a layer deeper than that, which is like they're actually able to have them in the first place because of the communications technology, social media, and all of that. And I think I agree with everything. I think there will definitely, most people will be laggards, but the rising tide of Bitcoin lifts all boats at the end of the day. And Bitcoin is just one part of the equation. I think on the back end of this event horizon, we really do need some structural societal change and conversations like this, the ability to have this conversation, distribute it, give me immense hope that the signal will get out there once people recognize that there's a problem, go and search for a solution. And there's more of these types of conversations available than ever before. And they will obviously continue to happen. And not only that, but continue to increase in terms of the amount of people that are putting this type of content out there and trying to educate people. And so it is very heavy to sort of grasp the fact that the global financial system is in a very precarious situation, but conversations like this, and more importantly, the ability to have it and distribute it, give me a lot of optimism for the future that we'll actually be able to affect change. And despite what many people will say about the efficacy of the mainstream media, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. There's media entities are dying. I think we saw Universal had to write down like a $1 billion loss because CNN just isn't selling ad dollars because people aren't watching it anymore. And so I do think socially people are shifting towards these types of interviews, these conversations with people outside the mainstream, which should have a overall net positive on actually being able to affect change moving forward.
Hey, do you still have your Bitcoin on an exchange? Don't hold your Bitcoin on an exchange. Take it into self-custody. If you're looking for an easy way to do that, we have the BitKey. BitKey is Bitcoin made easy to use and hard to lose. Take the first step. Get your Bitcoin off the exchange. Check out the link in the show notes. That'll get you 20% off your BitKey or use the code TFTC20 at checkout.